The train lurched to a stop in Hill City, South Dakota, and Florence Reed pressed her gloved hand against the dusty window, searching the small crowd gathered on the platform for the face she had memorized from a single photograph carried in her pocket for 8 months. The air outside shimmered with late August heat, and the town looked smaller than she had imagined, wooden buildings clustered together like children seeking shade, the Black Hills rising dark and mysterious in the distance behind them. She stepped down from the train car, her traveling dress clinging to her back despite the early hour, and a porter handed down her 2 worn cases. The photograph had shown a man with serious eyes and a firm jaw, standing beside a fence with mountains behind him. Quinn Parker had written to her every 2 weeks since January, his letters growing warmer with each exchange, until finally in June he had asked her to come west and become his wife. She had left Boston 3 days ago, her heart full of hope and terror in equal measure. The platform cleared quickly, passengers dispersing into waiting wagons or walking toward the town proper. Florence stood alone with her cases, scanning every face that passed. A tall man in dusty range clothes approached, his hat pulled low, and she felt her breath catch. But he walked past her without a glance, and the flutter of hope died in her chest. "Miss Reed." A voice spoke behind her, uncertain and rough. She turned to find a younger man, perhaps 22 or 23, with sun-darkened skin and eyes that held something she could not quite name. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair dampened with sweat. "Yes, I am Florence Reed. Are you from the Parker Ranch?" Relief flooded through her. Perhaps Quinn had sent his hired hand to fetch her. The man's face tightened and he looked down at the hat in his hands. "I am Quentin Parker." "Quinn's brother?" "Oh," she smiled, though confusion stirred. "It is wonderful to meet you. Is Quinn waiting at the ranch? I know he mentioned he could not often leave during the summer months." Quentin's jaw worked, and he seemed unable to meet her eyes. The platform had emptied now, and the train was already beginning to pull away behind her. The whistle shrieked, and Florence jumped slightly. "Miss Reed, I am sorry. I hoped to send a telegram, but Pa said you would already have left Boston. There is no easy way to say this." He finally looked at her, and she saw grief etched deep in the lines around his eyes. "Quinn is dead. He died in April." The world tilted. Florence heard the words but could not make them connect to anything real. She had a letter from Quinn dated April 3rd, full of plans for their wedding, for the house he was building onto the main ranch structure, for the future they would share. "That cannot be right. I received letters from him. The last one came in early May. He wrote those letters in March, miss. He always wrote several at once and asked me to post them regular-like. He wanted you to keep getting them even when he was too busy with the calving season." Quentin's voice was gentle but firm. "There was an accident. A horse threw him near Eagle Creek. He hit his head on the rocks." Florence's knees went weak and she swayed. Quentin dropped his hat and caught her elbow, steadying her. "Easy now. Let's get you somewhere you can sit down." "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. She pulled her arm free, though the world still felt unsteady. "No, I need to understand. You are telling me the man I traveled 900 miles to marry has been dead for 4 months. And no one thought to inform me. Like I said, Pa wanted to send word, but you had already left Boston before we could get the telegram through. The letter we sent must have crossed paths with you on the rails." Quentin picked up his hat, his movements careful. "I am truly sorry, Miss Reed. Quinn talked about you all the time. He was happier those last months than I had seen him in years." She wanted to scream. She wanted to collapse right there on the platform and sob until her throat was raw. But Florence Reed had not traveled halfway across the country to fall apart in public. She drew herself up, forcing her spine straight. "I see. Then I suppose I shall need to purchase a return ticket." If you could direct me to the station office. It is closed until tomorrow. The next eastbound train would not come through until Wednesday anyway. Quentin shifted his weight. Miss Reed, you look about ready to collapse. Let me at least take you to the boarding house. Mrs. Chen runs a respectable place. You can rest, have a proper meal, figure out what you want to do. Everything in her wanted to refuse to maintain some scrap of dignity in this nightmare. But the truth was she had spent most of her savings on the train ticket west. She had $23 in her reticule and 2 cases of belongings. The thought of navigating an unfamiliar town alone, finding lodging, making arrangements, all while grief crashed over her in waves, was simply too much. "All right," she said quietly. "Thank you." Quentin gathered her cases as though they weighed nothing and led her to a wagon hitched nearby. He helped her up onto the seat with careful courtesy, then loaded her luggage in the back. As they rolled down the main street, Florence stared at the town that should have been her new home. A general store, a saloon, a church with a white steeple, a blacksmith shop where the ring of hammer on anvil punctuated the morning air. Everything looked strange and harsh in the brilliant sunlight. "How long had you and Quinn been corresponding?" Quentin asked after a long silence. 8 months. His cousin Margaret is married to my brother Thomas. She suggested we might write to each other. Florence kept her voice even through force of will. "We discovered we shared many interests. He seemed like a good man. He was, the best I knew." Quentin's hands were steady on the reins. Quinn was the one who kept the ranch running after Ma died. Pa sort of lost heart for it. Quinn took care of everything, made sure we did not lose the land. Made sure I stayed in school until I finished, even though I wanted to quit and work full-time. Despite herself, Florence felt a flicker of curiosity. "You and Quinn had different mothers." "No, same ma. But Quinn took after her people, had her dark coloring. I got Pa's looks." He glanced at her. "Quinn was 7 years older, practically raised me after Ma passed when I was 9. The boarding house was a 2-story structure painted yellow with white trim, remarkably cheerful against the rough landscape. A Chinese woman in her 40s answered Quentin's knock, her face breaking into a warm smile that faded when she saw Florence's expression. "Mrs. Chen, this is Miss Florence Reed from Boston. She is going to need a room for a few days." Quentin's tone was careful. Mrs. Chen looked between them, clearly reading the situation. "Of course. Come in, dear. I have a nice room on the 2nd floor, faces east so it catches the morning light." The room was small but immaculately clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the street. Quentin set down her cases and hovered uncertainly in the doorway. "I will be at the Dusty Boot Saloon if you need anything. Or you can send word to the ranch. It is about 5 miles north on the main road. I come into town most days for supplies or errands." He paused. "Again, Miss Reed, I am truly sorry. If there is anything I can do to help, you just say so." After he left, Mrs. Chen brought up a basin of cool water and a plate of food Florence could not imagine eating. "You rest now. Things will look clearer after you sleep." But Florence could not sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her cases, at the room that was not the home she had imagined, in the town where she was supposed to have started a new life. She pulled Quinn's photograph from her pocket. A handsome man with dark hair and strong features looked back at her, forever frozen in that moment of stillness. She had been so careful, so sensible. After years of watching her friends make hasty marriages to men who turned out to be drunks or spendthrifts or worse, she had been determined to choose wisely. Quinn's letters had been thoughtful and honest. He had told her about the ranch, about the hard work and the isolation, about the beauty of the Black Hills and the harshness of the winters. He had not painted a romantic fantasy, but had given her the truth as he saw it. And she had fallen in love with that truth, with the steady reliability in his words, with the life they could build together. Now he was gone, and she was stranded 900 miles from home with barely enough money to survive a week. Florence finally lay down as the afternoon heat pressed against the window. She did not cry. The tears felt locked somewhere deep inside, too heavy to escape. Instead, she stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine what she was supposed to do next. She must have dozed eventually because she woke to the softer light of early evening. Her traveling dress was hopelessly wrinkled, but she had no energy to change. She washed her face and went downstairs, following the sound of voices to a dining room where several other boarders were gathered around a long table. Mrs. Chen appeared immediately. "Come sit, Miss Reed. You need to eat something." The meal was simple but well prepared: roasted chicken and vegetables and fresh bread. Florence forced herself to eat, knowing she needed strength even if she had no appetite. The other boarders were polite but curious, and she deflected their questions with vague answers about visiting the area. After dinner, she stepped outside onto the front porch. The heat had finally broken and a cooling breeze drifted down from the hills. The town was quieter now, though yellow lights spilled from the saloon down the street, and she could hear piano music and occasional laughter. "Evening, Miss Reed." She turned to find Quentin climbing the porch steps. He had cleaned up since that morning, his hair damp and his shirt fresh. He held his hat in his hands again, that same uncertain gesture. "Good evening, Mr. Parker. Just Quentin, please. I brought you this." He held out an envelope. "It is the money Quinn had saved for your ticket out here. Seemed only right you should have it back, help you get home." Florence took the envelope, feeling the weight of bills inside. "That is very kind. Thank you. Also wanted to say, if you need work while you are figuring things out, Mrs. Chen could probably use help. And the school teacher, Miss Grayson, she has been looking for an assistant now that the town is growing." Quentin shifted his weight. "Not trying to keep you here if you want to go back east. Just thought you should know your options. Why are you being so kind to me?" The question emerged before she could stop it. "You owe me nothing. I am simply the woman who was foolish enough to agree to marry a man she had never met. You were not foolish. Quinn was a good man, and you took a chance on something real. That takes courage." Quentin met her eyes directly. "And you came all this way in good faith. The least I can do is make sure you are all right before you leave." Something in his directness, in the simple decency of his words, finally cracked the ice around her grief. Florence felt her eyes fill with tears. "I am sorry," she managed. "I should not be crying on you. Go ahead, you have earned it." Quentin's voice was gentle. "Do you want me to leave you alone or do you want company? Either way is fine." She should have sent him away. It was improper to stand on a darkening porch with a man she had just met, crying over his dead brother. But the loneliness of the day pressed down on her, and the thought of going back inside to her small, empty room was unbearable. "Company," she whispered. "If you do not mind." "I do not mind." Quentin settled onto the porch railing, keeping a respectful distance. "Quinn talked about you all the time, you know. He would come in from working all day, bone-tired, and he would still stay up writing letters to you. He said you were the smartest woman he had ever corresponded with. Said you actually read the books he recommended and had opinions on them. He recommended I read Walden. I thought it was pretentious nonsense and told him so." Despite her tears, Florence felt the ghost of a smile. He wrote back that he agreed, but thought the pretentious nonsense had some good points about living deliberately. That sounds like Quinn. He always wanted to see both sides of things. Quentin looked out at the darkening street. After Ma died, he sort of became the heart of our family. He kept Pa going when he wanted to give up. He made sure we kept the ranch even when times got hard, and he never complained, never acted like it was too much. He paused. The day before the accident, he told me he felt like his life was finally beginning. That everything before had been preparation for what came next. The tears came harder now, and Florence pressed her hand over her mouth to muffle the sound. Quentin looked away, giving her privacy in her grief, but he did not leave. When she could breathe again, she wiped her face with her handkerchief. "I should go inside. Thank you for telling me about him. It helps somehow. Miss Reed, one more thing." Quentin caught her attention before she reached the door. "If you decide to stay in Hill City, even just for a little while, I would like to help however I can. Consider it paying forward what Quinn would have done for you." "Why would I stay? There is nothing for me here. Maybe not. But going back to Boston right away, going back to everything you left behind, might be harder than you think. Sometimes it helps to have a little breathing room before making big decisions." He settled his hat on his head. "Just think about it." After he left, Florence went upstairs and counted the money in the envelope. $85. Combined with her own funds, she had just over $100. Enough to live modestly for a month or two, or enough for a train ticket home with a little left over. She lay in bed that night thinking about what waited for her in Boston. Her parents had both passed years ago. She had been living with her brother Thomas and his wife Margaret, helping with their 3 children, gradually becoming more spinster aunt than independent woman. When Quinn's letters had started arriving, Margaret had encouraged the correspondence eagerly, perhaps too eagerly. Florence had convinced herself it was romance, that she was choosing her own adventure. But if she was honest, she had also been escaping a life that felt increasingly narrow and predetermined. What would she return to? The same small room in Thomas's house, the same rounds of caring for her nieces and nephew, the same pitying looks from married friends at church socials. The same slow narrowing of possibilities as she grew older and less marriageable. The thought made her chest tight. Florence did not make any decisions that night, but when she woke the next morning, she dressed carefully and went downstairs to speak with Mrs. Chen. "I may stay a few extra days," she said, "just until I decide what to do next." Mrs. Chen's face brightened. "Of course, dear. Stay as long as you need. The weekly rate is $5, includes meals." After breakfast, Florence walked through Hill City. The town was already bustling despite the early hour. She passed the general store where a group of ranchers were loading supplies onto wagons. The church stood quiet in the morning light, its doors open to reveal simple wooden pews. She found the schoolhouse on the edge of town, a tidy building with a small yard and a hand pump for water. A woman emerged carrying a stack of books. She was perhaps 30, with auburn hair pinned in a practical bun and an intelligent face marked by freckles. "Hello," Florence said. "Are you Miss Grayson?" "I am, and you must be Miss Reed. Quentin Parker stopped by yesterday evening and mentioned you might be looking for work." She shifted the books to her hip. "I apologize for being direct, but are you truly interested, or are you just filling time before you return east?" The bluntness was refreshing. "Honestly, I do not know yet. I only arrived yesterday. I learned that the man I came here to marry died 4 months ago, and I am still trying to understand what that means for my future." Miss Grayson's expression softened with sympathy. "Quinn Parker." "Yes, I heard about the correspondence. He was a good man, respected in the community. I am sorry for your loss. Did you know him well?" "Well enough. He helped build the addition onto the schoolhouse last year. He was always patient with the children when they visited the ranch on field trips." She gestured toward the building. "Would you like to come inside? I can show you what the work would entail if you are interested." The interior of the schoolhouse smelled of chalk and old wood. Rows of desks faced a blackboard, and shelves lined one wall, half empty and clearly in need of organization. Maps hung on the walls, their edges curling with age. I have 28 students this year, ranging from 6 to 14 years old. It is overwhelming some days. Miss Grayson set down her books. What I need is someone who can help with the younger children's reading and arithmetic while I work with the older students. Also, someone who can help organize the library, prepare materials, that sort of thing. What would it pay? $8 a week. I know it is not much, but the school board recently approved funds for an assistant. She studied Florence carefully. You have education, I assume. I attended normal school in Boston. I taught for 2 years before my father became ill and I needed to return home to help care for him. Florence ran her hand along one of the desks. I have not taught since then. That was 7 years ago. It is like riding a bicycle. The skills come back quickly. Miss Grayson smiled. I am not asking you to decide right now. But if you are interested, you could start next week when the fall term begins. It would give you something to do, at least, while you figure out your next steps. Florence thanked her and left with a promise to consider the offer. She spent the rest of the morning exploring the town. The general store was a cluttered wonderland of goods ranging from farm equipment to fabric to canned foods. The owner, a cheerful man named Mr. Dalton, showed her the post office counter in the back corner. If you are staying in town, you can receive mail here, he explained. And if you need anything ordered special, I can usually get it within 2 weeks. She visited the church and met Reverend Walsh, an elderly man with kind eyes who insisted she attend services on Sunday. Everyone is welcome here, my dear. Whether you are passing through or staying, you are part of our community. By afternoon, Florence found herself back at the boarding house, exhausted but feeling slightly more grounded. She had options, at least. She could stay for a few weeks, earn some money, and leave once she had sorted through her grief. It was not the future she had imagined, but it was something. Quentin appeared again that evening, this time with a basket. Mrs. Chen mentioned you had been out walking all day. Thought you might like some fresh eggs from the ranch. Our hens are producing more than we can use. You do not need to keep bringing me things. I know, but I want to. He set the basket on the porch railing. Did you speak with Miss Grayson? I did. She offered me a position as her assistant. Florence studied him in the fading light. Why did you tell her about me? Because you strike me as someone who needs a purpose. Sitting idle while you grieve is only going to make things harder. Quentin leaned against the post. And because I thought you might be good at it. Quinn said you loved working with children before your father got sick. He told you that. He told me everything about you, Miss Reed. I probably know more about you than is proper for a stranger. He smiled slightly. I know you prefer tea to coffee. I know you worry about being too outspoken. I know you have a scar on your left hand from when you caught it in a loom at the textile mill where you worked after your father died. I know you send money to your friend Alice every month because her husband drinks his wages and she has 3 children to feed. Florence felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment but from the strange intimacy of being so known. That seems unfair. I know almost nothing about you except that you lost your brother and you are very kind to desperate strangers. I am not that interesting. I am 23 years old. I have been working the ranch since I could walk. I like horses better than people most days. I tried going to school in Rapid City for a year, thought I might become a lawyer, but I missed the ranch too much and came home. He shrugged. Nothing mysterious. Are you engaged, courting anyone? No to both. Not much time for romance when you are running a ranch and taking care of a father who has trouble getting out of bed most mornings. He said it matter-of-factly without self-pity. What about you? Any heartbroken suitors back in Boston? No. I received a few offers over the years, but none that felt right. One man was perfectly nice but boring as dried oats. Another was exciting but unreliable. One was wealthy but condescending. She looked down at her hands. Quinn seemed like someone I could build a real partnership with. Someone who valued my mind as much as anything else. He did. He used to read your letters out loud sometimes, the parts where you talked about books or ideas. He would get this look on his face, like he could not believe his luck that you had agreed to come west. Quentin's voice was soft. He would have been a good husband to you, Miss Reed, Florence. If you are going to know everything about me, you should use my first name. Florence, then. And I am Quentin, though most folks call me Quinn. They fell into easy conversation after that, sitting on the porch as the stars emerged overhead. He told her about the ranch, about the challenges of keeping cattle healthy through the brutal winters, about the satisfaction of watching new calves take their first wobbling steps each spring. She told him about Boston, about the cramped streets and the constant noise, about how she had never seen a true horizon until the train had carried her west into the open plains. When he finally left, Florence realized she had gone several hours without thinking about her grief. The ache was still there, a constant weight in her chest, but it had eased slightly. Perhaps staying in Hill City for a while was not such a terrible idea after all. The next morning, Florence sent a telegram to her brother Thomas explaining what had happened and informing him she would be staying in South Dakota temporarily. Then she went to the schoolhouse and told Miss Grayson she would accept the position. Wonderful. Miss Grayson shook her hand firmly. We start Monday. Come a bit early so I can show you around properly and we can discuss the curriculum. Florence spent the weekend preparing. She unpacked her cases fully, hanging her dresses in the small wardrobe and arranging her few books on the windowsill. She bought a new notebook at the general store to use for lesson planning. She attended church on Sunday and met dozens of people whose names she immediately forgot, overwhelmed by their kindness and curiosity. Quentin drove in Sunday afternoon and found her on the porch again. Want to see the ranch? Thought you might like to know where Quinn lived, what he built. She should have said no. It seemed morbid, visiting the home of a dead man she had never met, but curiosity won out over propriety. All right, let me get my hat. The Parker Ranch lay 5 miles north of Hill City, nestled in a valley with the Black Hills rising behind it. The house was a rambling structure that had clearly been added onto over the years, each new section slightly different from the last. Outbuildings dotted the property, a large barn, a stable, a chicken coop, a smokehouse. Cattle grazed in the far pastures, dark shapes against the golden grass. Quinn built that addition there. Quentin pointed to a newer section of the house with a covered porch. He finished it in March. It was supposed to be for you, a private space away from the main house. Florence climbed down from the wagon and walked toward the addition. The wood was still fresh and pale, not yet weathered by sun and wind. She peered through the windows at a sitting room and bedroom, empty but for a rocking chair and a bed frame. He made that chair himself, Quentin said from behind her. Spent his evenings after supper working on it all winter. Said you mentioned in one of your letters that your grandmother had a rocking chair you loved, and he wanted to make one similar. The grief surged back, sharp and overwhelming. Florence pressed her hand against the window glass, feeling the warmth from the afternoon sun. This was supposed to have been her home. Quinn had built it for her with his own hands, had imagined her sitting in that chair, reading or sewing or simply watching the hills change color with the seasons. I am sorry, Quentin said quietly. I should not have brought you here. It is too much. No, she wiped her eyes. No, I am glad you did. It makes him real in a way the letters never quite could. They walked the property together. Quentin showed her the barn where they kept the horses, introducing her to each one by name and personality. He showed her the garden Quinn had planted, now overgrown with late summer vegetables. He showed her the creek where the accident had happened, a peaceful spot shaded by cottonwood trees. "I found him there," Quentin said, staring at the water. "He had been missing for hours. When I finally tracked him, he was lying at the edge of the creek. The horse was grazing nearby like nothing had happened. I am sorry you had to be the one to find him. Someone had to. Better me than Pa. I am not sure he could have survived it." Quentin picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in his hand. "Quinn was the strong one in our family, the one who held everything together. Without him, Pa just fell apart. Some days he does not even get dressed, just sits in his chair staring at nothing. That must be hard on you." "It is what it is. I am managing." He tossed the stone into the creek. "But that is why I cannot leave the ranch, cannot pursue anything else. Pa needs me here and the ranch needs someone running it. Quinn understood that kind of responsibility. I suppose I inherited it when he died." They returned to the house as the sun lowered toward the western hills. An older man sat on the front porch, thin and hollow-eyed. He looked up as they approached. "Pa, this is Florence Reed. She came out from Boston to marry Quinn." Mr. Parker stared at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head slowly. "You should go home, girl, nothing but sorrow here." "Pa," Quentin said sharply, "it is the truth. This land takes everything. Took my wife, took my son, it will take you too eventually." Mr. Parker stood with difficulty and shuffled back into the house, leaving them in awkward silence. "I apologize for him," Quentin said. "He is not himself since Quinn died. He is grieving. People say harsh things when they are in pain." Florence touched Quentin's arm briefly. "Thank you for showing me the ranch. It helped me understand Quinn better." On the drive back to town, they talked about lighter things. Quentin told her funny stories about learning to ride as a child, about the ornery bull that terrorized everyone, until Quinn figured out it just wanted someone to scratch behind its ears. Florence told him about teaching, about the satisfaction of watching a child's face light up when they finally understood a difficult concept. By the time they reached Hill City, something had shifted between them. They were no longer strangers bound only by tragedy but something approaching friends. Monday morning arrived bright and cool. Florence dressed carefully in her most practical dress and walked to the schoolhouse. Miss Grayson was already there, organizing papers on her desk, ready for chaos. She asked cheerfully. The children began arriving shortly after 8. They ranged from tiny 6-year-olds with lunch pails almost as big as they were to gangly 14-year-olds who slouched in the back rows. Miss Grayson introduced Florence as Miss Reed, their new assistant teacher, and the children regarded her with open curiosity. The day passed in a blur of names and lessons and minor disasters. One boy spilled ink all over his desk. 2 girls got into an argument about whose turn it was to use the good eraser. A small child burst into tears and would not stop crying until Florence sat with him and read a story. By the time the final bell rang at 3, Florence was exhausted but exhilarated. She had forgotten how much she loved the energy of a classroom, the constant demands and small triumphs. "You did well," Miss Grayson said as they tidied up. "Better than well, actually. You have a knack for connecting with them. Thank you. It felt good to be useful again." She fell into a routine over the following weeks. Wake early, walk to the schoolhouse, spend the day teaching, return to the boarding house for dinner, then prepare lessons for the next day. Quentin continued to visit several times a week, sometimes with supplies from the ranch, sometimes just to talk. They developed an easy friendship built on long conversations and comfortable silences. He told her about his dreams for the ranch, how he wanted to improve the breeding stock and expand into horse training. She told him about the books she loved, about her frustration with how women were expected to shrink themselves to fit into acceptable roles. They argued good-naturedly about politics and religion, and whether cats or dogs made better companions. "You are surprisingly opinionated for someone so quiet," Quentin observed one evening. "I have learned to keep my opinions to myself in polite company." "But you do not feel like polite company anymore." "Should I be insulted?" "No, it is a compliment. Polite company is exhausting. You are easy." He grinned. "I will take that as high praise." Florence tried not to think too hard about how much she looked forward to his visits, how her days felt brighter when she saw his wagon rolling down the street. She told herself it was just friendship, that she was lonely in a new place and he was kind. She ignored the way her pulse quickened when he smiled at her, the way she found herself watching for him through the schoolhouse windows. She was still mourning Quinn, after all. It would be wrong to develop feelings for his brother so soon. Disrespectful, even. But grief was a strange companion. Some days it hit her with crushing force, and she would find herself crying over dinner for no apparent reason. Other days it faded to a dull background ache, and she could go hours without thinking about Quinn at all. She felt guilty about the lighter days, as though forgetting her grief was a betrayal. Miss Grayson became a friend as well as a colleague. They often had tea together after school, discussing lesson plans and town gossip in equal measure. "Quentin Parker has been spending a lot of time in town lately," Miss Grayson observed one afternoon in late September. "More than usual. He is just being kind, making sure I am settling in all right." That is one interpretation." Miss Grayson's eyes sparkled with amusement. "Another interpretation is that he is courting you." "That is ridiculous. I came here to marry his brother. It would be completely inappropriate for him to court me." "Would it? You never actually met Quinn. You had an epistolary relationship, which is lovely but not the same as real acquaintance. You do not owe his memory eternal devotion." She refilled their teacups. "Besides, Quentin is nothing like Quinn. They were very different people." "What do you mean?" Quinn was the responsible one, the one everyone relied on. He was kind but serious, always thinking about the next season, the next challenge. He carried a lot of weight on his shoulders. Miss Grayson stirred honey into her tea. "Quentin is more open, more willing to laugh, less burdened, even though he carries his own responsibilities now." They would have made very different husbands. Florence had not thought about it that way before. She had been mourning not just Quinn but the future she had imagined with him. But that future had been built on letters and hopes, not on real knowledge of who he was as a person. "Do you think it is wrong that I am starting to forget what I thought I knew about Quinn?" she asked quietly. "I think it is human. You cannot mourn forever for someone you never met, Florence. At some point you have to let yourself live again." That night, Florence reread Quinn's letters. She had been carrying them with her since leaving Boston, tied with a ribbon and tucked in the bottom of her case. His handwriting was careful and precise, his words thoughtful and measured. He had told her about the ranch, about his hopes for the future, about his belief that they could build a good life together. But there was a distance in the letters too, she realized now. A formality that never quite broke down into real intimacy. He had shared his thoughts but not his fears, his plans but not his doubts. She had been falling in love with an idea of him, not with the complicated reality. Quentin, by contrast, held nothing back. He told her about his frustrations with his father, his worries about money, his fears that he was not capable of running the ranch as well as Quinn had. He asked her opinion on things and actually listened to her answers. He teased her and let her tease him back. It was not courtship, she told herself firmly. It was friendship. But even as she thought it, She knew she was lying to herself. October brought cooler weather and the first hints of autumn color in the hills. The children grew more settled in their routines, and Florence found her teaching rhythm. She took on more responsibilities, leading full lessons for the younger students while Miss Grayson worked with the older ones. One afternoon, a boy named Samuel stayed after school, nervous and shuffling his feet. "Miss Reed, I was wondering if you could help me with something." "Of course, Samuel. What do you need?" "There is this girl, Emma Thompson. She is really smart and nice, and I want to write her a letter telling her I like her, but I do not know what to say." He looked at her hopefully. "You came all the way from Boston because of letters. So I thought maybe you could teach me how to write a good one." Florence felt a pang in her chest but pushed it aside. "That is very sweet of you, Samuel. Let us see what we can do." They spent an hour working on the letter. Florence helped him express his feelings without being too forward, to show interest without being presumptuous. When they finally finished, Samuel copied the letter carefully onto clean paper. "You think she will like it?" he asked anxiously. "I think any girl would be lucky to receive such a thoughtful letter." Florence smiled at him. "Just remember, letters are wonderful, but actually talking to her is important too. Letters can only tell you so much about a person." After Samuel left, Florence sat alone in the empty classroom. Out of the mouths of babes, she thought. She had learned that lesson the hard way. Quentin arrived just as she was locking the schoolhouse door. "Good timing," she said. "I was about to walk back to town. Want to take the long way? The cottonwoods are turning, and it is beautiful along the creek." They walked together along the path that wound through the edge of town and out toward the open country. The air smelled of dry grass and distant wood smoke. The cottonwoods glowed gold in the slanting afternoon light. "I helped a student write a love letter today," Florence said. "Did it work?" "I have no idea. He has not given it to her yet." She kicked at a pebble on the path. "It made me think about Quinn's letters, about how much weight I put on words without knowing the person behind them." Quentin was quiet for a moment. "Do you regret coming west?" "No. Even with everything that happened, I do not regret it." She looked at him. "I think I needed to leave Boston. I was becoming invisible there, just fading into the background of other people's lives. Coming here, even under these circumstances, gave me back a sense of purpose. I am glad you stayed. Hill City is better with you in it. You are just saying that because I help you with your grammar when you write letters to cattle buyers." "That too. But I mean it, Florence. You have become important to me." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "I know the timing is terrible. I know you came here for Quinn, and I know you are still grieving, but I need to be honest with you." Her heart began to race. "Quentin, do not say anything you will regret. I am falling in love with you. Actually, I think I am already there. I look for reasons to come into town just so I can see you. I think about you constantly. You are the first thing on my mind when I wake up and the last thing I think about before I sleep." He ran his hand through his hair, frustrated. "I know it is not fair to you. I know I am probably Quinn's ghost to you, a pale echo of what you lost, but I cannot keep pretending I only see you as a friend." Florence felt tears prick her eyes. "You are not an echo of Quinn. You are completely your own person. Does that mean you feel the same way, or are you letting me down gently?" She should have been certain of her answer. But standing there in the golden October light, looking at Quentin's earnest face, she realized she had been lying to herself for weeks. She had fallen in love with him too, gradually and inevitably, even as she told herself it was impossible. "I do not know what I feel," she said honestly. "Everything is so complicated. I came here to marry your brother. How can I have feelings for you without betraying his memory? Quinn is gone, Florence. He would want you to be happy, not spend your life mourning what might have been." Quentin stepped closer. "I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I am just asking if you could see a future where we might be together, if there is any possibility of that." "Yes," she whispered. "There is a possibility." He smiled then, a genuine smile full of relief and joy. "That is enough for now." They continued walking, but something had changed. The air between them felt charged with potential. When their hands brushed accidentally, neither pulled away. By the time they reached the boarding house, Florence's heart was full of equal parts terror and hope. November arrived with the first serious cold. The children showed up to school bundled in layers, their cheeks red from the walk. Florence bought a warm coat from the general store and learned to bank the stove properly to keep her room heated through the night. Quentin's visits became more frequent. They went on long walks when weather permitted. He taught her to ride horseback, patient with her nervousness. She helped him with ranch paperwork, organizing records and drafting business letters. They fell into an easy domesticity that felt natural and right. Mr. Parker remained distant and cold. The few times Florence visited the ranch, he barely acknowledged her presence. She tried not to take it personally, understanding that she represented everything he had lost. One evening in mid-November, Quentin arrived at the boarding house looking exhausted and discouraged. "Bad day?" Florence asked from the porch. "Pa told me to stop seeing you. Said I was dishonoring Quinn's memory." He slumped into the chair beside her. "He said if I did not stop visiting you, I should leave the ranch permanently." Florence felt cold fear grip her chest. "You cannot leave the ranch. It is your home, your livelihood." "I know. But I am not going to stop seeing you either." Quentin looked at her. "I have been thinking. The ranch is too much for one person anyway. Maybe it is time to sell some of the land, downsize to something more manageable. Pa could live comfortably on the proceeds and I could find other work." "You would give up everything for me." "It is not giving up if I am choosing something better." Florence reached for his hand. "I cannot let you do that. Your father is grieving and angry, but he will come around eventually. We just need to give him time." "What if he does not? What if I have to choose between you and the ranch? Then we will figure it out together, but do not make any rash decisions yet." She squeezed his hand. "Promise me." "I promise. But Florence, I am serious about this, about us. When you are ready, when enough time has passed that it feels right, I want to marry you." Her breath caught. "That is a very large leap from what we are doing now." "Maybe, but I know what I want. I have known for weeks." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "I can wait as long as you need. Just tell me there is a chance." "There is more than a chance," she said softly. "I love you, Quentin. I think I have for a while now, even though I kept telling myself I should not." He kissed her then properly, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, Florence felt something settle in her chest, a rightness she had never experienced before. "We should probably not do that on the front porch where everyone can see," she said breathlessly. "Probably not. But I do not particularly care what people think. I work at the school. I have to care what people think," he laughed. "Fair point. I will endeavor to be more discreet." But discretion was difficult in a small town. By December, everyone in Hill City knew that Quentin Parker was courting Florence Reed. Some people thought it was romantic, a love story born from tragedy. Others thought it was scandalous, disrespectful to Quinn's memory. Miss Grayson was firmly in the romantic camp. "Anyone who has eyes can see you are perfect for each other. Do not let the gossips make you miserable." Reverend Walsh was more measured but ultimately supportive. "The heart wants what it wants, my dear. Quinn has been gone for 8 months now. You are allowed to move forward with your life." The one person who did not come around was Mr. Parker. At Thanksgiving, Quentin tried again to bring Florence to the ranch, hoping the holiday might soften his father's heart. But Mr. Parker refused to come out of his room when he learned she was there. I am sorry, Quentin said as they ate a quiet meal in the new addition. He is being unreasonable. He lost his son. There is no reasonable way to grieve that. Florence looked around at the room Quinn had built for her, trying to imagine living here with Quentin while his father nursed his bitterness in the main house. Maybe we need to reconsider the ranch situation. I do not think I can live here while your father hates me. He does not hate you. He hates that life keeps changing without his permission. Quentin set down his fork. But you are right. We cannot build a life together with that kind of tension hanging over us. They spent the next few weeks quietly investigating options. Quentin spoke with neighboring ranchers about partnerships or potential land sales. Florence saved every penny of her teaching salary. They made careful plans, trying to balance respect for Mr. Parker with their own need to move forward. Christmas brought a surprise. On Christmas Eve, after the church service and the children's pageant, Mr. Parker appeared at the boarding house. Mrs. Chen showed him to the sitting room where Florence was reading. Mr. Parker. She stood, uncertain. This is unexpected. Sit down, girl. I have something to say. He lowered himself into a chair, moving like an old man though he was barely 60. I have been unfair to you. Quinn wrote to me about you, told me how much you meant to him. He would have wanted you to be happy, even if that happiness came in a different form than planned. Florence hardly dared to breathe. I never meant any disrespect to his memory. I know. I have been angry at the wrong people, angry at you for surviving when he did not, angry at Quentin for finding joy when I cannot, angry at God for taking my son. He looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. But anger is not bringing Quinn back. It is just driving away everyone else I love. You have been grieving. No one blames you for that. Quentin does. He is too loyal to say so, but I know he has been miserable these past months, caught between duty to me and his feelings for you. Mr. Parker pulled an envelope from his pocket. I found something while going through Quinn's things. I think you should have it. Florence opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a letter in Quinn's careful handwriting, dated March 28, 1885. Pa, the letter began. If you are reading this, something has happened to me. I want you to know that I have no regrets about the life I have lived. The ranch has been a good legacy to carry forward, but it should not be a burden. If I am gone, please do not let the ranch consume you the way it sometimes consumed me. Quentin is young and capable. He will find his own path, and you need to let him. I also want to say something about Florence Reed. I have been corresponding with a woman from Boston, and I have asked her to come west to marry me. If she has already arrived when you read this, please take care of her. She is brave and intelligent, and she deserves better than to be stranded in a strange place. Help her return home if that is what she wants, or help her build a new life here if she chooses to stay. If something happens to me before she arrives, tell her I was grateful for her letters. They gave me hope that my life could be more than just work and duty. She helped me remember how to dream. And Pa, if by some chance she and Quentin develop feelings for each other, do not stand in their way. Life is short and uncertain. Love should be celebrated, not rejected out of stubborn loyalty to what might have been. I love you, Pa. Take care of yourself and Quentin. The ranch will survive if you let it go. Your family will not. Florence read the letter twice, tears streaming down her face. Quinn had known somehow that she might end up with Quentin. He had given them his blessing before he even died. He always was smarter than the rest of us, Mr. Parker said roughly. I should have read that letter months ago, but I could not face going through his things. Quentin finally convinced me last week. Thank you for showing me this. It is yours to keep. And Miss Reed, I want to apologize. You are welcome at the ranch anytime. I was wrong to make you feel otherwise. He stood with difficulty. Quentin is a good man. He will make you happy in ways Quinn never could have. Different does not mean worse. After he left, Florence sat holding the letter, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. Quinn had understood, even before his death, that life was unpredictable, and love could not be controlled or planned. He had given her and Quentin permission to be happy. On Christmas morning, Quentin arrived early at the boarding house, his eyes bright with cold and hope. "Pa talked to you last night," he said. "He told me he did, and he gave me Quinn's letter." She handed it to him, watching as he read it. "I did not want to show this to you until Pa had read it first," Quentin admitted. "I found it in November, but I knew Pa needed to see it before anyone else. You have been carrying this secret for weeks. I wanted you to be free of the guilt, but I also did not want to overstep. It was not my place to share Quinn's words without Pa's knowledge." He pulled her into his arms. "I am sorry I waited so long. You did the right thing. Your father needed to come to peace in his own time." Florence pulled back to look at him. "Quentin, I love you, not as a replacement for Quinn, not as second best, but because you are exactly who I want to be with. Is that a yes, then?" "To what question?" He dropped to one knee right there in the boarding house sitting room. "Florence Reed, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me at the ranch or anywhere else you want and be my partner in all things?" "Yes." She laughed through her tears. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married in late January in the small church with half the town in attendance. Florence wore a simple cream-colored dress that Miss Grayson helped her make. Quentin wore his best suit, his hair neatly combed for once. Mr. Parker stood beside his son, tears streaming down his face throughout the ceremony. When Reverend Walsh pronounced them husband and wife, Quentin kissed her with such joy that everyone in the church burst into applause. The wedding supper was held at the boarding house, with Mrs. Chen preparing an elaborate feast. Neighbors brought gifts and well wishes. Samuel, the boy Florence had helped write a love letter, shyly informed her that Emma Thompson had said yes to walking out with him. "See," Florence told Quentin, "letters can lead to good things. They can also lead to better things." He twirled her around the makeshift dance floor. "I am grateful Quinn wrote to you, but I am more grateful you stayed long enough to give us a chance." They spent their wedding night in the addition Quinn had built, the room that had been meant for Florence all along. As they lay together in the darkness, Florence thought about the strange path that had brought her here. She had traveled 900 miles to marry a man she never met, only to fall in love with his brother instead. It was not the story she had imagined, but it was better. It was real and complicated and full of unexpected grace. Life on the ranch was harder than Florence had anticipated. She continued teaching through the spring term but knew she would need to resign eventually to help Quentin full-time. The work was unending. Cooking, cleaning, tending the garden, helping with the animals, managing the household accounts. Her hands grew rough with work, and her dresses were often dusty by noon. But there was satisfaction in the work, too. She learned to milk cows and gather eggs, to preserve vegetables and bake bread. She learned to read the weather and anticipate the needs of the ranch. Quentin taught her patiently, never making her feel foolish for her city ignorance. Mr. Parker slowly emerged from his grief. He began eating meals with them instead of alone in his room. He started offering advice about ranch management again, his voice rusty from disuse. He even smiled occasionally, particularly when Quentin and Florence bantered with each other. "You remind me of my wife," he told Florence one evening. "She never let me get away with anything either." Spring arrived with dramatic suddenness, the hills erupting in wildflowers and new grass. The cattle grew fat on the fresh growth, and new calves appeared almost daily. Quentin was up before dawn and working until dark, and Florence worked alongside him as much as she could. In May, Florence realized her monthly courses had not arrived. She waited another week before saying anything, afraid to hope. When she finally told Quentin, he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with delight. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly. "You are going to be a mother, and you are going to be a father. Do you think we are ready? Probably not. But we will figure it out together." The pregnancy was difficult. Florence suffered terrible morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon. The heat of summer made her swell and ache. But Quentin was attentive and patient, bringing her cool water and rubbing her feet without complaint. Mr. Parker became unexpectedly involved, building a cradle in his workshop and offering awkward advice about childbirth. "I was not there when you boys were born," he admitted. "Men did not attend births back then, but I regret missing those moments." "You will meet this baby soon enough," Florence assured him. In late December, as snow fell softly outside, Florence went into labor. The midwife, Mrs. Walsh, arrived and took command of the situation with practiced efficiency. Quentin paced outside the door until his father made him sit down. "Wearing a hole in the floor would not help," Mr. Parker said. "Have some coffee and try to breathe." After 14 hours of labor, Florence gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Quentin came in as soon as Mrs. Walsh allowed, his face pale with worry that melted into wonder when he saw his son. "He is perfect," Quentin whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand. "What should we name him?" Florence asked, exhausted but happy. "I was thinking Quinn, if that is all right with you." Florence felt tears prick her eyes. "Quinn Parker, it is perfect." Mr. Parker met his grandson with tears streaming down his weathered face. "He has your mother's eyes," he told Quentin. "And Quinn's nose. He is a Parker through and through." Life with a newborn was chaotic and exhausting. Florence spent her days nursing and changing and soothing, surviving on fragmented sleep and cold coffee. But when she looked at her son's face, at the way Quentin gazed at the baby with absolute devotion, she felt a contentment deeper than anything she had imagined. Quinn Jr. grew quickly, developing a sunny disposition and his father's dark hair. By the time he was 6 months old, he was trying to crawl, determined to explore every corner of the house. Mr. Parker spent hours with his grandson, finally finding purpose again in caring for this new generation. "Thank you," he told Florence one evening as they watched Quentin play with the baby. "You gave this family back its future." Florence resumed part-time work at the school when Quinn Jr. was a year old, bringing him with her. The children were fascinated by the baby, and Miss Grayson was happy to help watch him during lessons. "You are making this look easy," Miss Grayson observed. "Teaching and mothering and running a ranch." "It is not easy at all," Florence laughed. "I am just too stubborn to admit defeat." Quentin proved to be a devoted father, changing diapers and walking the floor with a crying baby without complaint. He sang to his son, taught him to recognize the different sounds of the ranch, showed him how to be gentle with the animals. "You are a natural at this," Florence told him. "I had good practice with Quinn. He let me help when our cousins came to visit with their babies, said it was good training for when I had my own family." Quentin kissed the top of his son's head. "I want to be the kind of father he would have been, patient and present." 2 years after Quinn Jr. was born, Florence became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the autumn of 1889, she gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret, after Florence's sister-in-law who had first suggested the correspondence with Quinn. Margaret was a quiet baby with her mother's light coloring and a serious expression that made everyone laugh. Quinn Jr. was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly trying to show her his toys and singing her garbled lullabies. The ranch continued to prosper under Quentin's management. He expanded the horse training operation, developing a reputation for producing reliable, well-trained animals. Florence took over the ranch accounts completely, her education and organizational skills proving invaluable. Mr. Parker lived long enough to see Margaret's second birthday. He passed peacefully in his sleep one winter night, a smile on his face. At his funeral, Reverend Walsh spoke of a man who had known great sorrow but had found his way back to joy before the end. He was ready to go, Quentin said quietly as they stood by the grave. He told me last week that he was at peace, that he had seen his grandchildren and knew the ranch was in good hands. He was a good man who faced terrible loss, Florence said. I am glad we had these years with him. Life continued its rhythms. Quinn Jr. started school, proving to be a bright student who loved reading as much as his mother. Margaret grew into a spirited child who preferred the barn to the house, following her father everywhere. A third child, a son they named Thomas after Florence's brother, arrived when Margaret was 4. The addition Quinn Sr. had built became the heart of their home. Florence set up a small library there, filling the shelves with books for her children. Quentin built a larger porch where they spent summer evenings, watching the children play while the sun set behind the Black Hills. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quentin took Florence on a rare trip into Rapid City. They stayed in a hotel, ate dinner at a restaurant, and went to see a traveling theater performance. It felt impossibly glamorous after years of ranch life. "Do you ever regret it?" Quentin asked as they lay in the unfamiliar hotel bed. "Giving up the teaching career you were building? Staying in South Dakota instead of returning to Boston?" "Never. This is exactly where I am supposed to be." Florence rolled to face him. "I came here looking for one future and found a different one. Better does not even begin to describe it. Quinn would have been a good husband to you. Steady and reliable. Maybe, but you are the husband I needed. You challenge me and support me in equal measure. You make me laugh. You let me be fully myself without trying to change me." She kissed him softly. "I loved the idea of Quinn, but I love the reality of you. That is good, because you are stuck with me for the long term." They returned to the ranch the next day to find their children had driven the hired girl nearly to distraction. Quinn Jr. had convinced his siblings to help reorganize the pantry, resulting in flour coating most of the kitchen. Margaret had decided the chickens needed baths. Thomas had simply screamed whenever anyone tried to put him down. "Welcome home," the hired girl said with obvious relief. "They are all yours again." Life was messy and loud and exhausting and wonderful. Years passed in a blur of seasons. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and dreams. Quinn Jr., true to his namesake, showed an early aptitude for ranch management. Margaret declared her intention to become a veterinarian, shocking everyone with her ambition. Thomas proved to be the family diplomat, able to smooth over any conflict with charm and humor. Florence never stopped teaching entirely. She tutored students at the ranch during the summer months and occasionally substituted at the school when Miss Grayson needed help. She wrote articles about ranch life for an agricultural magazine, her writing clear and practical and occasionally humorous. Quentin became a respected figure in the community, known for his fair dealing and willingness to help neighbors in need. He served on the school board and helped organize a cooperative for small ranchers. He aged gracefully, gray appearing in his dark hair, lines deepening around his eyes from squinting into the sun. On a summer evening in 1902, Florence sat on the porch watching her grown children argue good-naturedly about politics. Quinn Jr., now 20 and running most of the ranch operations, was engaged to a girl from Rapid City. Margaret, 17 and fierce, was preparing to leave for veterinary school in Iowa. Thomas, 14, was already taller than his father and showed signs of inheriting his grandfather's skill with horses. "We built something good here," Quentin said softly, settling beside her on the rocking chair he had made so many years ago. "We did, all three of us." Florence thought of Quinn Sr., of the man whose letters had brought her west, whose death had seemed like the end of everything, but had turned out to be a complicated beginning. "You think he would be proud of what we have done with the ranch?" "I think he would be proud of the family we have built. The ranch is just buildings and land. But the children, the love, the life we have created, that is what matters." As the sun set behind the black hills, turning the sky brilliant shades of orange and pink, Florence thought about the long, strange journey that had brought her here. She had traveled 900 miles to marry a man who died before she arrived. She had been told he died in April and had thought her future had died with him. But standing in the rubble of those plans, she had found something more real and lasting than anything she could have imagined. She had found Quentin, who had been worth the heartbreak and the waiting. She had found a home in the wild landscape of South Dakota. She had found herself, stronger and more capable than she had known. The cowboy's brother had become her husband, her partner, her greatest love. And in the end, that was the story worth telling. Not the tragedy of what was lost, but the triumph of what was found. Florence reached for Quentin's hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. Around them, their children's laughter rang out in the cooling evening air, and the ranch stretched away into the gathering dusk, full of promise and peace. She had come west looking for one man and found another. She had come seeking a predetermined future and discovered something far better. A life built choice by choice, day by day, with courage and love and stubborn hope. The letters that brought her here had been written by Quinn, but the life she loved had been built with Quentin. And every day she was grateful for both brothers. One who had given her the courage to leave everything familiar behind. One who had given her a reason to stay and build something new. The story that began with death had become a story about life in its fullest, messiest, most beautiful form. And Florence Reed Parker, who had once been a spinster schoolteacher from Boston, had become exactly who she was meant to be. A wife, a mother, a teacher, a writer, a rancher, a woman who knew her own worth and lived by her own terms. As the stars began to emerge overhead, brilliant against the darkening sky, Quentin pulled her closer, and Florence leaned into his warmth. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more of the endless tasks that filled their days. But tonight, in this perfect moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The ranch was quiet except for the sounds of the children still talking on the other side of the porch, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through the grass. It was the sound of home, of family, of a life well lived. And Florence, who had traveled so far and lost so much and found even more, finally understood what Quinn Sr. had written in his last letter. Life was short and uncertain. Love should be celebrated, not rejected. Happiness should be seized with both hands whenever it appeared, regardless of how it arrived or what form it took. She had seized it. She was still seizing it, every single day, and that made all the difference.